Rob Rastovich, today's guest, is the Chief Technology Officer for ThingLogix and a cattle rancher. Rob is passionate about sustainability. At the office, he uses tech to create tools to prevent food spoilage. On the ranch, his free-range cattle eat barley from nearby breweries. He'll share insights about his work and his superpower. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe. Welcome to the Superpowers for Good show. Rob, thank you so much for joining me today. It's really an honor and a privilege for me to get to know you and to talk about some of the ways that you're using technology to help solve some of the world's big problems.
Well, I appreciate you having us on, Devin.
Well, thank you. Rob, you've been doing some interesting, cool things. And of course, you're an interesting guy. Let's start there. You are the CTO of a tech company and, by the way, a rancher. How did those two things come about? How does that work?
Yeah, it's one of the most popular questions. Like they don't seem like they would go together very well, but it's actually I've been ranching for I'm third generation. So my grandfather actually homesteaded the ranch that we live on. So we're in our little county. I live in Central Oregon in the little county of Deschutes County. We're 102 years old this year, and so we're the first ranch to reach 100 years old, and that's still owned and operated by the original family. So ranching is kind of more like something I don't know how not to do. It's just kind of in your blood, and it's something that I moved away from the ranch for a few years, and it was always like, at first I couldn't wait to get away from it, and then I couldn't wait to get back to it. So it's kind of something that you just quite literally, I think, is part of your DNA. The technology stuff really came in by accident. I actually was a marketing and communications by education. Went to school to be an advertising executive back in the day, and back then the Macintosh came out, and I thought that is just the coolest thing ever. And so I started messing around with desktop publishing, doing those kinds of things. And I had an advertising agency down in Southern California, and then one day somebody came up with the idea that there's this thing called the internet, and you can put up a page and people can see it. So I thought, well, that's kind of cool. I mean, and it became something else that we could sell to in our advertising agency. So I learned how to do that, and then I was hooked. That was the crack cocaine of technology. I just couldn't get enough of it. And then Java came out, and I became a Java developer. And then I kind of moved into building, e-commerce sites. I had one of the top 10 e-commerce sites below IBM and Amazon when back in the day in the early 90s. We're quite far from them now, but so I just couldn't get enough and kept going and kept going. And then cloud computing came out, and I became a technologist at heart. And the two are really kind of, and most people think, how different are those? And they're really very much the same in the sense of, like, you're building something, like on the ranch or in a farm, you're taking care of something, you're building something that was not there this morning is now there, is greener, is better, is taken care of. Technology is kind of the same way. You're building things and creating things, and so you're innovating on things, and so the mindset is really the same, and it just becomes an aptitude. So that's how I joined the two together.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I imagine there are opportunities for you to see intersections along the lines of water, that there must be 1,000 different technologies around water measurement, conservation, et cetera, and you must touch on that sometimes, perhaps with USGS being a client, but also certainly see that on the ranching. Is that right? Are you seeing water as a common issue there?
Yeah, and water happens to be one of my passions. So we actually live in Eastern Oregon, and most people, when they think of Oregon, they think it's rainy, and they think of Portland and Eugene. I live on the opposite side of the Cascade Mountains, and it's a desert. And so in a desert, if he who has the water wins. And everybody requires water. I don't care whether you're a rancher or whether you're a golfer, whether you're a recreational enthusiast, or whether you just want to live in a house and turn on the tap. Everybody needs water, and that water source becomes, a valuable commodity, not just in terms of how it's delivered, but the quality of it and how you use it and how you manage it. And water has like the most unsophisticated distribution system of all our utilities. I mean, you think we have electrical wires that run across the globe, and we deliver and we move electricity from here to there, and we manage it, and they buy and sell electricity. Natural gas, kind of the same way. They can move it, they can manage that. Even our garbage collection and our sewage systems are all managed. Water still just kind of runs down a ditch, and it runs in the ground, and we kind of get a little as it goes by, and all that, and the ecosystem that goes around there becomes an important thing. So water management and on the farm is crucial, but water management around humanity is even more crucial. So yeah, water becomes a very much a passion of mine.
So tell us a little bit about what ThingLogix does for the USGS.
So one of the things, so we do a variety of things for them. So some of the projects that we do that are really kind of fun and interesting is we monitor migration patterns of snow geese and ducks. The snow geese actually have a little sensor on them, a little collar that goes around them, and they fly around and they send data about where they're at and how they're migrating and where their mating grounds are and all those. And ducks have a little backpack that they put on, and it sends us data about that, so they monitor those. We monitor the Grand Canyon and wind patterns and sand patterns. Volcanoes is a new project of ours, monitoring the volcanoes, sending data there. But one of the big ones we do is the stream management. And the USGS is, the scientists there have come up with algorithms. We actually take and put cameras on canals and rivers. They started with smaller canals, but they're moving on up to the bigger ones, Colorado River and whatnot. But they put cameras on there, and that camera just simply takes a picture of that stream, a video, a constant flow of video coming in from that. And on each side, there's a little structure there that kind of gives a water level and whatnot. So they have developed the algorithms, and using our technology and our framework, by which they can now start in real time to start measuring water at a particular point. So let's just imagine, and their interest in it is for not just for irrigation and farmers and all those other things, for flood prevention and whatnot, but also for wildlife. So the duck with the backpack on it is going to mate in a swampy land, and they want to know, is there going to be a swamp there this year or not? And what does that mean for the duck population? What does it mean for that? So being able to, in real time, predict, water levels coming down the Colorado and what that means for a farmer in Southern California or a farmer here in Oregon. What does that mean, tomorrow and next month and, at the end of the growing season? And what does that mean in terms of where does diversions happen and how much loss is going? So being able, the one thing, a guy once told me, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So being able to have tools to be able to measure and manage it now gives us the ability to make decisions about, all right, how much water can be diverted by irrigation. Sometimes more water needs to be diverted by irrigation if it's a flood season. Sometimes we got to, keep less of it. But being able to measure things not only at the macro level is very important. And then the efficiencies that we get on farm with technology. So one of the things we use is they call the fertigation system. And fertigation is a combination irrigation and fertilizing system. So there's a sensor that goes in the soil, and that sensor, reads the data coming out of the soil and tells the irrigation system, how much moisture it needs and what nutrients it needs. Does it need phosphorus? Does it need nitrogen? What does it need? So it sends a message back to the pump. The pump turns on, the valve opens, sends that plant exactly what it needs. No more, no less. that efficiency really utilize, as opposed to how we used to do it is, okay, send the water down and we'll water that row for, a few hours, and we'll water the next row for a few hours. But being able to get that efficiency also now leaves more water to put back in stream and for the other uses of it.
Yeah, it's amazing technology, and it's cool to hear some of the things you're doing with it. Um, what are the things that get you most excited about at work when you are uh, there, putting on your CTO cap? What gets you excited in the morning?
Well, I tell you, it's the possibilities. I remember. So I used to do. I started out, doing programming with e-commerce and that kind of stuff. I built e-commerce websites, and after a while, I went into enterprise computing, and then one day I started doing what they call cloud computing, which is CRMs, customer relationship management systems like Salesforce.com and whatnot. One day, a couple of buddies of mine, we were sitting around, and we were able to get um, we were able to get this little piece of hardware, to send a message up to the internet and onto the screen. And I actually remember I was sitting at the kitchen table. They called them an Arduino. It's just a little tiny microcomputer, and I had all this stuff everywhere, and I was trying to figure out, how to do it. And I, you know, turned on I did a few commands, and I was able to make the light blink from my computer. I was able to send a message up to the internet and make the light blink on this little thing next to my thing. And I show my came over, look at watch this. And she looks at it. And I go, watch that light. I type away, it blinks. I'm like, look at that. Because you're gonna clean this shit up, aren't you? Right? Wasn't that impressed? Um, but when I first saw that and I discovered the interoperability of things, the way that we can, things can talk to each other. Sometimes people the first thing people talk about when they think about IoT, they start thinking about robots and artificial intelligence and Big Brother, and that stuff is so far. I mean, will it ever happen? I don't know, but that's not where we're at. We're at the place now where the ability where we can actually make the efficiencies of not just water production, but distribution. Business models are changing. Um, Consumer patterns are changing. This is the whole idea. I had a guy come to me once, and he was a pool guy, and he says, I want to make a new website so that people can order online and they can schedule appointments online, and they can order their parts and they can order their chemicals. And I says, that's no. Let's not do that. What happened? Let's sell your customers a connected pump, a connected pool pump. You put the pool pump in the pool and you sell it to them, and it costs a couple $100. And that pump tells you all the chemicals in there. It tells you the cleanliness of the water. It sends back if it's broken or not. And so now your chemicals are arriving automatically. The pump, does a preventive maintenance on itself, going, you know what? I think in 2 weeks' time, I might break down. So instead of Friday before the pool party and having to make a rush out there to do an appointment, you're out 2 weeks before it. The being able to provide that type of subscription, it's a relationship between the consumer and the provider. Now it's not just what I always call the request response. I request something, you give it to me. That's the end of our relationship. Now these relationships are much different in businesses, and I think that's a good thing, that we start getting to be more of and it brings mom and pa back into the equation. It starts now. The small businesses can actually create an enterprise for themselves and compete with the things of the big box stores, as I like to call them. And so the possibilities of what's possible, that's where I have to kind of tone it down a little bit, because that's where I'll start getting a little carried away, and everybody like, okay, well, let's bring it back down here. Why do we actually need my dishwasher connected? Well, because you can.
Yeah. That's great. Well, Rob, you've accomplished some amazing things in your career, and both as a rancher and as a technologist. what do you see as your superpower?
That's an interesting question because my first response typically is, I have no superpowers. I always, when I walk into a room, I always assume I'm the dumbest guy in the room, and so I kind of sit, and the first thing I do is start listening. What's going on, because I'm 99% certain that everybody in that room is, you know, faster, smarter. They can leap tall buildings in a single bound, and I'm just a lowly guy. But one thing I guess that I have learned in my career, and for lack of a better term, and I don't know how to explain, and I don't know that it's a superpower. I think it's more of a gift, and not one that was, not one that I deserve, but it's more. The way I always describe it is, I make people feel comfortable. When I'm with a client, it's somehow and I think it's more of a, because I don't think I'm that smart of a guy, and I don't believe that, I don't believe, a lot of technicians, a lot of technology guys, they like to come in and they start, throwing, we're going to do DNSs and SQL statements, and we're going to do MQTT over HTTP, and we're going to do socket. And everybody in the room is like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But, oh, you sound smart, so you must be the guy. Well, I like to talk about
Yeah,
the actual solution. And I think that's the rancher in me. It's like, it has to be a practical, solution that is viable, is, affordable, and we know how to do it. And I think that comes across a lot of times, especially in the tech world. In the ranching world, that's kind of a common thing. And it's funny. I always say I have one foot in these two worlds. And ThingLogix, our offices are actually in the Silicon Valley, and the ranch obviously is in Central Oregon. And so I always say I'm a man with no country, because when I'm down in Silicon Valley and I, talking to people and say, well, I have a ranch. Well, what do you do? Well, I have cattle, and we grow, pasture and hay. And cattle? Yeah, like ground beef and steak. Really? Yeah, and I go, yeah. He goes, do you supply that to the stores? I go, well, yeah, we say, I had no idea. Well, then they start wondering, well, how does that work? How does the cow? And then up in Oregon, I'll talk to some of my rancher buddies, because I only know ranchers here, and I'll start talking. I go, well, we got. What do you do? I have IoT company. What's that? Well, it's technology. My wife runs a computer, but I have nothing to do with it.
yeah.
But one thing about the rancher and the farming community, very real people. I mean, when you talked about down to earth, you can't get more down to earth than that group of people. And so I think that kind of bleeds over into the technology world, and some of
Yeah.
that comes around. And the biggest deals of my career, um, have always been not because I'm the smartest guy, but because I think people feel comfortable enough to know that, okay, well, at least he'll get it done. you know. And then the other
Yeah.
thing I think that comes
Yeah.
with that is there's a work ethic that comes with when you're on a ranch. And I always tell anybody, I mean, you can be outsmart, you'll be smarter than me, you'll be faster than me, you'll maybe live longer than me, but you won't outwork me. That's that'll be one thing that I will be up on top. So
Oh, that's good. As I think about your ability to put people at ease, to make people feel comfortable, and you tie that to your ranching experience, it seems like there are some practices, and you hinted at a few of these things that people might emulate, that they might consciously copy in order to help put people more at ease. Um, One that you hit on was clearly this idea of not thinking about yourself as being smarter than the other folks in the room, but taking a moment to assume that everyone else is smarter, and that you have something to learn,
yeah.
listening as a result. That seems like a pretty insightful thing. What else would you coach people to do to emulate this rancher side of your personality to make people more comfortable and at ease with you?
Well, I mean, you hit upon one. I think you listen first, and I think that's one of the things in the consulting world. A lot of times you'll see, consultants come in and they have the answers, right? And they're going to save the day. One thing I've learned is there's not much new under the sun. What I need to know is what's your particular issue, what's your particular problem, and then see if we can't help from there. But I think I would say the other one, and for lack of a better term, um, the ability to make it simple. I I sometimes I think that what happens is, we like the more complicated things are, if we know like a particular, like I say, in tech has its own vernacular. And every industry, finance has its own vernacular. The government has its own vernacular. And when you get in those and you start, you know, feeling like that vernacular and those buzzwords are what is going to give you value. That's where I think one of the things that I try to do is not to do any of that. Say, all right, very simple. This is how it works. We're going to do this. We're going to do this, and we're going to do this. And the other thing is it's a common phrase, keep it simple, stupid, right? But in technology, sometimes if the more complicated you seem to make something, somehow there's this perception that, oh, it must be more valuable. You must be more valuable. But the reality is, the more simple it is, the more artful it is. And technology, like everything else, is, in my opinion, and we can have this discussion another time. Is it art or is it science? I think it's as much art as it is science. And I think, ranching is as much art as it is science. There's these things that are the intangibles of whether you're doing, whether you are, whether you're plowing a field or whether you're writing Java code. There's a sense of style and a sense of ownership and a sense of pride and all of that. And yeah, you can just type it out and you can go through the motions and you can get paid, but it's that art form that when you look at this product at the end of the day, whether that be a program that connects all these waterways together, or whether that's a field that you just hayed and hauled all the hay in and we're sitting on the porch and going, I've done a good job. There's a great pride in that. So I think that's kind of the intangible about that. It's something that when you're at the end of the day, it's got to be simple enough that everybody can understand it. And I always tell my guys when I hire kids, I go, the more complex, if you start getting too complex where you have to have these complicated, you're doing it wrong. The more complex it is, the less scalable it is, the less understandable it is, the less sustainable it is. You got to keep it nice and easy. And when you can do the simplicity of it, and that's the art form of it, getting it simple. And I think that's, a lot of times, for me anyway, if I look at whether it's a painting or a play or a song that's very complicated and, it has a lot of dimensions and stuff like that. And I guess, like, I'm sure you could dive into that and we could talk about it. But the ones that touch me are the ones that just communicate a message, and it communicates to you and it touches you in some way. And I believe that sense can be transmitted no matter what you're doing, whether it's technology or whether it's, herding cows.
Fantastic. Well, Rob, thank you so much for sharing those insights. I really appreciate it. Really helpful, and I see how following your advice would certainly help me help others be more at ease. So, thank you.
Thank you for having
Before we wrap up, would you take just a minute and tell people how they can learn more about your ranch and how they can learn more about ThingLogix and how they can connect with you on social media or elsewhere?
Yeah, so Facebook, Twitter, all the regular social medias you can find me on. ThingLogix, it's thinglogix.com. You can see kind of where we've been, where we've come from, history of it on the ranch. It's called barleybeef.com. It's called barley beef because what we do is we have in our little town, there's a bunch of breweries, and we pick up the spent grains from the breweries, and that's what we feed to the cows. And so I always tell people, drink more beer, support your local farmer. But barleybeef.com is where you can find out about the ranch.
Fantastic. Well, we appreciate you, Rob. Thank you very much for being with us today, and we wish you every success in your efforts to solve all of the world's problems with technology.
All right. Thanks for having me.
All righty, let's do some good. Thank you for tuning in to the Superpowers for Good show. Twice each week, we host changemakers who share their impact, insights, and superpowers. Don't miss another episode. Subscribe today at superpowersforgood.com. That's superpowers, 4, good.com. Be super empowered. Get your copy of the book, Superpowers for Good, as an ebook, audiobook, paperback, or hardcover edition via your favorite online retailer. Interested in having me speak to your company, organization, or association? Visit devinthorpe.com. Then let's talk. Now, keep using your superpowers for good. Together, we can reverse climate change, improve global health, and eradicate poverty.